UFC 247 sees Dominick Reyes taking on the incomparable champion in Jon Jones. Now, I've watched a fair amount of UFC in my time, and I can't quite remember a time where we had two individuals with perfect records. Now, obviously, you know, in the record books, there is a loss in Jon Jones' column against Matt Hamill. But for those who have been watching the UFC for a long time, will tell you that wasn't a loss. He was clearly winning that and definitely on his way to winning it. So that definitely doesn't count. But, you know, not to take away in terms of what Jon Jones has done. And I think that as a champion, he is one of the more underappreciated champions in the UFC, with the likes of, you know, Conor McGregor, Jorge Masvidal, and this new generation that's come in. I think what's really happened is we've seen the star power of Jon Jones not quite appreciated for the fighter, the truly unique fighter that he was. And he really pioneered a center of excellence and a real decade of excellence in terms of fighting, and remains in the conversation, if not already, in terms of the greatest of all time. Now, this fight is that of legacy. Now, hold on, you say, Kev. Like, you're on the juice, you're on the good stuff. But let me explain. In Dominick Reyes, we see an individual who has carved out a career in mixed martial arts, and he's around 30 years old. So he started in 2014 and has only been 6 years in the sport. And those of you that, you know, really take the sport seriously and understand the amount of effort and time it takes, know that, you know, you could train mixed martial arts in a decade and train in one discipline in a decade and really only get to the apex of it. But in a short period of time, Dominick Reyes, the graduations and permutations of skill that he's been able to exhibit, specifically in striking, has been phenomenal. Obviously, it's manifested in his record, and, you know, the stars have aligned, and now he's in the box seat to control his destiny, so he says in the UFC countdown. And really, this is an exciting fight. There's a lot of parallels to draw between these two fighters. Physically, they're both genuine light heavyweights, not the, you know, the Weidmans and the Rockholds of the world that are, you know, trying to come up for middleweight. So these guys generally belong in their weight class. They both obviously have imposing records, not having, you know, lost anything. Dominick Reyes is a very interesting character, obviously, from a fighting perspective. He's picked up the art of striking and really ran with it. He comes from an NFL football background, and his story is he didn't quite make it in the league and pivoted to mixed martial arts. And what a crescendo and what a turning point moment for him, in that he's really climbed the apex of the sport and is now knocking on the door with what is probably the most difficult challenge and the most difficult Rubik's Cube to solve in MMA, which is that of Jon Jones. So I think, look, it's really interesting to see the background of both fighters. Obviously, if you've been following the UFC for any amount of time, we understand, you know, the enigma that is Jon Jones. You know, the Jon Jones that was a young, starry-eyed kid at the age of 23 that was meditating in a park in New York, who saw an old lady, you know, getting robbed, ran after, apparently armbarred the man. And this is on the day that he had the title fight against Shogun Rua. Demolished Shogun, like absolutely demolished, who was really a dominant legend in the sport. Ran through Lyoto Machida, went through Quinton Rampage Jackson, went through Rashad Evans, just went through a marauders map of really trained killers in the lightweight division, and has continued to do so. Obviously, we know the demons that have plagued him, the drug consumption, his extensive, you know, battles with Daniel Cormier, which potentially, I think that chapter is closed. But really, what is to say about Jon Jones? He really is an icon in the sport, and when all is said and done, if he already isn't in your conversation for pound best fighter of all time, I'd say there's a problem in the way you're looking at things. But generally, this fight presents itself as a really exciting one, in that we have the undefeated Reyes and the undefeated Jones, and these two individuals are just going to come in and hopefully stand and bang and deliver what's really going to be an entertaining fight. Now, how did Reyes get here? So, he's obviously on a 12-fight winning streak. his last fight was against Chris Weidman, who he demolished in, the first round. He had a good test against Volkan Ozdemir. Ovince St. Preux, he had a devastating knockout, and obviously he had a very similar TKO against Jared Cannonier. So when you look at those names, Cannonier, who's obviously doing really well in the middleweight division at the moment, Volkan Ozdemir, big name there, Ovince St. Preux, Chris Weidman, these are not chumps, right? These are guys that have been in the UFC, are basically good names. So it's not that this guy's been babied into the record that he's got. He's generally deserved all the accolades that have been heaped upon him, and to get into the UFC at such a later age in his development. The way his striking has developed is, I wouldn't say reminiscent of Jones, but reminiscent of an individual that's really picking up the sport quite quickly. And he is 30 years old, but you usually see the apex of a fighter's career somewhere between that 30 to 35. So it'll be interesting to see, based on the fact that he hasn't had a lot of wear and tear, where his career takes him through. And I think what's really interesting about this fight is, depending on how well he performs, if he performs anywhere near how well Alexander performed, there is no doubt that the light heavyweight division is quite weak currently, right? There's a very thin crop of contenders. There's no reason to say that he'd get another fight for Jones in terms of a rematch, given that Jones has publicly said that he really wants to clear out this division. So I think this is a first of what could be, I'm not saying a trilogy, but multiple fights for these two if it goes in the way. So obviously, let's look at how Jones got here. His last fight was against Thiago Santos, and Santos really did test him. There were murmurings after the fight that, when Santos really peppered the leg, were we seeing a slowed down version of Jon? And I think the trap that we as, MMA fans can fall into is really, expecting, in the end of the day, he's a human being, right? So there's peaks and troughs in terms of performance and levels of performance. And while that may not have been his most entertaining fight, mate, that was a genuine display of skill from a true mixed martial artist, and not a fighter, but a true disciplinarian of the arts. Obviously, he had, his fight prior to that was with Anthony Smith. Gustafsson, who he, completed. He finished in round 3. Cormier and St. Preux. So look, what's to say about Jon Jones? He's deserved every accolade that's been bestowed upon him. As a fighter, as an individual, you can question his character, obviously. But as a fighter, I don't think there's anything you can say. So really, an exciting fight. And when you see the tail of the tapes, they both match very well physically. They both obviously weigh the same. They're both the same height, which is, athletically built. Jon, you could say, a bit more leaner. Reyes, just on the physical appearance alone, looks a bit more filled out in his frame. But obviously, Jon has that imposing reach. I think it's the biggest reach in the UFC, and boy, does he use it well. So specifically speaking to the fight and picking apart how this fight manifests itself, look, for Reyes to win, he needs to do what he's done best, and that is strike. So Reyes does a lot of his damage in the pocket. So with a combination of straights, uppers, and kicks, he's a very busy fighter. Now, obviously, this is his first title fight. So my thing is, if we don't see Reyes completing this within 2 to 3 rounds, the advantage obviously goes to Jones. Jones is a rhythm fighter, so Reyes really needs to come out of the gates, pressure him, fight in the pocket. And the thing is, with Jones's reach, it's advantageous for him to stay at a distance and really pick Reyes apart. So Reyes needs to, submit and conclude that he's going to get clipped on his way in. But in order for him to deal out damage, he needs to be within that pocket sphere. And boy, is he a really impressive fighter when he does so. Against Weidman, I think his little pop, you didn't even see it in real time. So what Reyes really possesses, which is really shocking for a guy that's only been, fighting for as little time as he has, is a really core understanding of distance management, and specifically in the pocket timing. if I were to compare him with a fighter, he really compares very favorably to Kevin Gastelum. And I think, I can't quite remember the phrasing, but he controls that chaos distance very well, in that he's in there really delivering the short and sharp punches that can really knock out people. And this is, concatenated by the fact that this is a big bloke. He's throwing sledgehammers, but he doesn't necessarily have to throw them at full pelt. But, even, a guy at light heavyweight, at around 90 kilos, throwing one of those sledgehammers hits you, it's going to hurt. And he integrates the kicks very well. So really, he needs to catch Jon, and he needs to catch Jon early. I don't think we've seen a lot of clinch work for Reyes, but if there's anything we've seen for Jon, is he is at the point of his life where he's really fighting for legacy. And legacy for him is really imposing his will on fighters. And there are a lot of fighters that go and, say the right things, and Reyes is saying the right things. He has to say the right things, okay? He has to G himself up to get into the cage to fight this legend and this mystique that is Jon Jones. But when they get in the cage and the cage gets closed, it's a very different shell of an individual. And we saw that with Anthony Smith. We saw that with Alexander Gustafsson in the second fight. Did we see that with Cormier? I don't know. I think we saw Cormier that didn't really have that, but it creates fear. It sparks fear in individuals, and he really needs to throw. He really needs to throw those paws that he has and inflict damage as early as possible. And he really needs to break the rhythm. So while we haven't necessarily seen a lot of clinching with him, anything that's going to break the rhythm of Jon, because Jon Jones is like the best striking computer you've ever seen. He's obviously got the most advantageous reach in mixed martial arts and UFC history, and he uses it well. His distance management is impeccable in the complete opposite spectrum. He fights, and he fights very long. He utilizes oblique kicks very well. So these are the kicks that really disengage people's shins. And on the face of it, stuff like that really doesn't look very damaging. But over the course of a 5-round fight, it all adds up, especially if you're an individual that, uses leg kicks and stuff like that. And understand this very well, that for an individual that has a primarily boxing-based attack, a lot of the heat that Reyes is throwing is coming from the legs. So we've seen Jon do this time and time again, but he's going to throw those oblique kicks. He's going to test out the distance management, and he's going to see what Reyes does to him. So Reyes really needs to come out, play his game plan, really shut out the mystique that is Jon Jones, and see him as any other fighter. And that's easily said than done, and that's probably the game plan that he has going into it. But generally, for him to be able to execute at a high level, he needs to leave it all out at the cage. And the thing is, when you fight like that, you leave yourself exposed to getting knocked the hell out. But he's got to understand that this is a legacy fight. The first person that generally beats Jon Jones is going to be an asterisk. It's going to be a punctuation in your career. So why not him? That's got to be his mentality. Why not me? And from everything he's shown in this short period of time, why not him? Now for Jon Jones, what does Jon Jones got to do? He's got to do what he's been doing for, over a decade in terms of in the octagon and the UFC. He's got to manage distance well. When Jon Jones enters the cage is his, art form and his tapestry. There's generally very few fighters that exhibit the level of creativity and on-the-fly striking differential that Jon Jones does. He integrates the spinning elbow very well. He will do charges. That chest hit that you saw Conor McGregor do, Jon Jones has done that before. I think he's an individual that uses a barrage of such diverse striking skills. The oblique kick, I mean, I'm sure this kick was done before, but Jon Jones really brought it and made it en vogue. He really is a master at understanding, and he lays a lot of traps. The thing about Jon Jones is he's always pawing and establishing distance. But at the same time, what he does when he establishes distance is adds to damage, right? So he can go 0 to 100 real quick, but he's always throwing out the jab, throwing out the straight, doing the oblique kick. there's no one time when, as an individual, as a fighter, you have a comfort level as to what Jon Jones is doing. And obviously, as a wrestler, the credentials lead themselves very strongly towards Jon Jones. So you don't necessarily, as Reyes, want to go to the ground. Now, I think what's interesting is we've seen a lot of fighters. Now, obviously, striking is Jon Jones' forte, and it's what he really enjoys doing. So I don't necessarily see this fight going on the ground. But if it does, obviously, it really lends itself very favorably towards Jon Jones. So, really, Dominick Reyes at all costs needs to avoid going to the ground. But again, to harken back to Jones, all he needs to do is establish distance, slowly pick Reyes apart, and really understand Reyes' strike patterns. Because if the camp have done their video research well, you don't necessarily want to get in the pocket with Dominick Reyes. And here's the thing. That's not to say that Jon Jones can't win a fight fighting in the pocket. He's simply fought too many evolved strikers and potentially better strikers than Dominick Reyes at that to not give him a chance to win like that. But I think when we think about the high stakes that Jon Jones has, and he has publicly talked about the pressure that's bestowed upon him, not necessarily just to win, but to win convincingly, he is at the stage where he is going to do everything within his power to win. And that's the first and foremost. So really, establish distance management very well, touch Reyes up, use the first round to establish what Reyes' patterns of attack are, and simply, ascertain from there. Jon Jones is like an ever-evolving computer, in that he really understands how individuals work into their striking and really counteracts that very well. And he's got such a diverse skill set to do so. It's really hard seeing Reyes pulling this out as an upset, to be honest. I'd be very interested to see what the odd makers have, but generally this is a fight that favors Jones on a lot of sort of metrics. But as we've seen in the UFC, and as we've seen in MMA as a whole, everyone starts the fight on the ground, on the floor rather, and everyone has a puncher's chance. And definitely an individual with the credential and the record such as Dominick Reyes, you'd be foolish to count him out completely. So it'll be really interesting. It's an interesting fight. Personally, this fight goes one of two ways. Reyes either TKO or knocks him out within the first 2 rounds. If it goes past that, it's really Jon Jones's fight to lose, and you could see him winning in a myriad of rounds. But I think this is a really interesting fight to watch for, because I generally see these two colliding again in the light heavyweight division. So not necessarily that I'm counting Reyes out, but what's next for Jones if he wins this? Well, who else is in this division? It's pretty light at the top in terms of the light heavyweight division, and a lot of people are saying that to really cement his legacy, he needs another belt. Obviously, there's this ongoing feud that he has with Adesanya, and by all accounts, Adesanya is game for this, but within a year's time. So, while that is playing itself out and manifesting itself, I think really heavyweight's where it's at, and I see a fight with Stipe Miocic to be, obviously the Miocic and Cormier fight needs to play itself out, but hold up, what if Cormier beats Miocic? So would Jones come up to heavyweight? I think I've heard him say that that's not necessarily how he wants to see it going, but generally, once he cleans out this division, and he is there, I see a move to heavyweight as the natural sort of progression. So look, I'd be interested to get your guys' view on who you think is going to win. So really, comment, leave your comments below. I'd love to reply and see what your response is, but it's an interesting fight, and only time will tell. Thanks for tuning in.